welcome everyone for being here this evening. This is the ORCRN Webinar Wednesday series. My name is Kai Huschke. I'm a board member of the Oregon Community Rights Network. Very often are kind of hosting or facilitating the different sort of topical issues that we've covered over the last couple years, doing these Webinar Wednesdays. Again, thank you very much for making the time to be here. Really appreciate it. I went back, and this is our 10th installment now of a Webinar Wednesday. We've been doing this for the last 2 years. We've had some really great guests, a lot of awesome topics. We've archived those on the ORCRN YouTube channel if you haven't found that already. Also, for those that were on earlier, there was a graphic up that mentioned tonight's topic. And at the very bottom, we had a pitch there for donations. We do a lot of work through these Webinar Wednesdays, other local organizing support work, host a series of workshops over the year on various topics, and then do a lot of advocacy work, both at the local level and the state level. Takes a lot of volunteer hours and, of course, donations. So if you're so inclined and are ready to, we would very much welcome any donations to the ORCRN. You can do so through the ORCRN website. I'm going to do a little bit of a quick introduction, and then I'll introduce our two guests this evening. I've got a series of questions that I'm going to go through, so we'll have more of a conversational feel to this topic tonight. And then we'll definitely leave some time at the end of the evening for any questions, comments from those that are in attendance here to bring into the conversation. So that'll be our format for tonight. Again, if you have a question or comment, we'll hold that kind of to the end. We can either do by calling names, or if you want to drop things in chat, I'll monitor that as we go. So let's get the show on the road, as they say. So that tonight's topic, or title for tonight's topic, is I Vote, But Does It Matter? Conversation about voting power. As everyone is clearly aware, especially those running for office, we are deep into election season. And as it seems to happen, we are, as voters, pretty well bombarded with promises being made to what is going to change if a certain person gets elected. At the same time, we're also exposed to a lot of hit pieces that are circulating on candidates. We seem to get reports of record-breaking campaign spending each election cycle these days. And there's a lot of time, energy, and hopes being poured into getting the quote unquote right person elected, or a particular measure passed or rejected. It seems like this frenetic energy, of course, comes up every 2 to 4 years in the greatest volume, especially when there's legislative, congressional, governor, presidential posts on the line. So there's this kind of big apparatus that gets ramped up that we then get to expose to as voters. So tonight we thought we would explore really the world of elections, how fair or democratic they really are. We'll get into some discussions about the political system itself, the impacts of being a country where there's a dominant two-party system, what that really means for us. And then we'll also kind of delve into, once we get those right people elected, are they able to follow through on those promises, and whose promises are they following through on? Or even can they do the various things that they want to do based on the fact that they will run into a political apparatus internally, whatever sort of body of government they may be elected to, as well as in some cases, the structure of law may limit the capability of fulfilling some of those promises. And I think one of the realms we most likely will also delve into is just the power of corporate lobbying, how that is shaping, or very often misshaping, our physical environment, our economic environment, our social landscapes, not just in Oregon, but more broadly. And I found it interesting in preparing to kind of put this introduction together. There was a headline that read, "Corporate lobbyists persuade Supreme Court to throw out pro-worker ruling." So even at the so-called US Supreme Court level of justice, reports coming out of the power of corporate lobbyists within that realm. So as you can see, we're going to cover lots of ground. We got some really great guests to sort of lead us through this conversation. And joining us tonight, we have Patrick Starnes and Marty Wilde. Patrick ran for governor in 2018, 2022. Patrick is described as a man who has recognized and taken action on the major flaw in our political system. That flaw is causing catastrophic problems for our planet, making health care insanely expensive and leaving our most vulnerable in the dust. That flaw is unlimited money in Oregon politics. And joining Patrick is Marty Wilde, who's a former state representative and current candidate for Lane County Circuit Court Judge. Marty's most noted for being outspoken on his views of the lack of transparency in party politics. And he is quoted as saying, in effect, the content and direction of legislation for all of Oregon is being decided by a group of 10 or fewer people picked by their ability to raise money, and this all being done in secret. Patrick and Marty, thank you very much for being here tonight. Really appreciate you guys taking the time, especially Marty, you on the campaign trail here with the election fast approaching. I thought I would kind of just kick things off with a question sort of in the campaign finance category and just kind of see where it flows from there. But, there's the expression that money can't buy you love, but perhaps it can buy you anything, just about anything else, including an election. So how much does money in your guys' view experience, how much does that trackable and even the dark source money not only affect who gets in office, but what those people do once they're in office on behalf of those financial benefactors? I know each of you have had experience and are tracking this and are very, very involved in sort of figuring that world out. So just curious from each of your perspectives, how is money really shaping or misshaping our world today? And, Patrick, maybe we'll have you start and then we'll have Marty jump in after.
Well, actually, Kai, since Marty is still my state representative until January, and he's been in Salem directly affected by all this. I'll let him start because he's been in the hot seat there in Salem, and I can cover other things if you don't mind.
Well, I'll be brief because Patrick has a lot more to say about this than I do because he's been working on it and done such great work on it, frankly. As a candidate, obviously you have to raise money. In each of the campaign cycles I ran, I think our internal money raising was probably 150K, which is pretty good for a state rep race, and that's mostly small donations, and some bigger stuff. And the challenge is that'll give you a campaign manager and some baseline ability to run a campaign, but when it comes to the big spending at the end of a campaign, that's where the big money really comes in. And for me, I mean, it was certainly people I agreed with. It was the League of Conservation Voters was a big supporter, as well as SEIU, and obviously I support what those institutions stand for. For the Republicans, it tends to be wealthy individuals and large corporate donors. But in a competitive seat, what you're really relying on that sort of arms race of money at the end of the day. And so the advantage of doing campaign finance reform, it's not really going to substantially touch that, that initial tranche of what you can get. But it really does cut down on the dumb spending you see here at the end and the super negative stuff. That the frustrating thing about the spending right here at the end is it's overwhelmingly negative, which serves to suppress the vote. It discourages people from voting, and it discourages people from believing that their political system can work. The influence, you asked also about the influence in office. The way you quoted the article I wrote for the Oregonian about who makes those decisions, and they really are the people who have the most direct conversations. The leadership has the most direct conversations with the major funders, and they have, frankly, a cachet. Certainly I can only speak for the Democratic side, but I imagine it must be the same on the other side. They go directly to leadership and have an influence that I could only dream of as a backbencher, right? If you want to know why your bill lives or dies, it's often because one of these major organizations, corporate or otherwise, has a strong opinion about it. And that's, when the speaker comes and says, your bill's going to come out looking like this, even though, it went in looking like something much stronger. So that's kind of the way it works. If you want to know why campaign finance reform didn't pass last time, it's because the major funders didn't want it to happen. It does concentrate power in the hands of relatively few, and that's quite unfortunate. I think Oregonians overwhelmingly believe in democracy, this concept that money is speech and we can't have any restrictions on it is really detrimental to people feeling like they can make a difference in their government. And when they believe they can, they do. But if they don't, they don't. I'll just give you an example on redistricting, for instance. I was opposed to dividing the University of Oregon's in my district, and one of the initial plans had it divided up between 3 House districts and 3 Senate districts, which is directly contrary to the directive to keep communities of interest together. And so I organized them to submit testimony, and they did. These are people who have influence and are, for the university community, they're overwhelmingly well educated, and they made a difference because they believe they could. But I just see so much discouragement, especially when I travel in rural areas, that their concerns will really be heard because they're not represented by, big money. So, sorry, didn't mean to ramble too much, but that's kind of how I see it in the campaign side, and then the influence later as well. But Patrick's been working on this a long time. I think he's got some stuff that's probably worth listening to more than me.
Well, I have a couple of slides that I gave to Kai. If you could pull up slide number 3, Kai, we could put it in the context where Oregon is nationally. It's pretty embarrassing. And that's what motivated me to run in 2018, because it was shocking that we were one of 5 states in the whole country with no limits whatsoever, just like Mississippi and others. Sort of waiting for the slide. Number 3 has us rated in the bottom 5 of the worst on campaign finance reform. I know this is 2015, but a lot hasn't changed, except we finally amended the Constitution so we can have contribution limits. And like the old saying, thank God for Mississippi, right? The jumping into this current governor's race, if you could go to slide number 6, this is the slide that shows the big spoiler in this governor's race with the big timber money and the big Phil Knight money in order to gather her signatures. Betsy Johnson's money is this is the one I'm looking for. Yeah, right there. So these are all her big donors over 200,000. This is sort of an older slide from September. I'm sure since then it's gotten even crazier. And then after she got on the ballot, which cost like $1 million for them to gather signatures, Phil Knight switched over to Drazen, I think is the next slide, Kai. And so then Phil Knight added, it's higher than this now. So once the polling came out and showed Betsy wasn't doing better than 20%, they jumped over to support the GOP. And then if you put Tina's slide up, it's the last one, you'll see, like Marty was saying, a lot of these groups that regular folks can support are just working people in unions with lots of small donations. No, go ahead, go back. That are bundled together. So if you can take that off. I just want to give a perspective of these large donations and the big difference between the billionaire donors and the corporate donors versus the large PACs, which represent a lot of regular working people, or Oregon Conservation League of Conservation Voters represents a whole variety of environmental groups, And I just want to stop real quick and thank all of you community rights volunteers. I know John Hunter's here from Douglas County, And Kai, if you're the vice chair of the state, thanks for volunteering and fighting for community rights. We would love to start a community rights organization here in Lynn County, because I know there's different chapters in different, because we have NTech, which is a big toxic battery manufacturer, and now they're trying to put the big factory farm in Scio. So we have a lot of small community rights in rural communities that need us to fight together against this big money again. And the big thing I'd like to say about my experience trying to get into debates in 2018, they had several debates, and I was only in the one debate where the high school students got to ask the questions. But even when I was in that debate, the media had set it up for the students to ask only the other two major party candidates, you know. And one of the moms of the students came up to tell me that she was really upset that at the last minute the students were directed to ask their questions to Bueller and Brown, and so I didn't really get to answer a lot of the questions. So that's just an example. And the reason why I'm bringing up the media is because when you see that they're spending $40 million in a governor's race, and now it's even higher, that the lion's share of that goes to the media, just like Marty was saying, with all these ugly ads that we're tired of seeing over and over. I mean, every time you go to YouTube, it's another ad, or anytime you go anywhere, it's tiresome. And what I would like to see, and that's what I role modeled in the last governor's race, was a real simple campaign finance limit bill, which would limit those all donations, yours and mine and Phil Knight's, to $1,000 per person per year. A ban on corporate money and a ban on PAC money. So just to keep it simple, I know there are other bills that have small donor PACs and different things like that. But what was great is Marty's agreed to, in his exit of Salem, to put together that bill that it's in the hopper and will be ready for January after he leaves. And I've got some freshmen that are interested in taking up that banner and keeping it going, because like they said before, these things don't pass if the big donors from either side don't like it. So it's not just that you hear of the term the money primary, which is the first primary that filters people out of running for office, is because if they can't raise hundreds of thousands of dollars, then they just won't run, you know. So there's a silent money primary that weeds people out right at the beginning. And obviously I haven't cared about that, because I just kept running forward regardless, and running on campaign finance reform, Oregon Health Plan for All, and a variety of other issues that are popular for all folks, even if they're Republicans and independents. You know, it wasn't just a partisan thing.
Oh, I'm curious, Patrick, as well as Marty, you know, you talk about, you just kind of laid out a sort of three-part change, Patrick, to how, you know, elections could look in Oregon there. Question I have that others may be interested in as well is how does that reconcile with, you know, the federal protection of corporate money in elections, whether it's, you know, prior to the Citizens United case or, you know, since then. You know, we've got this federal precedent now handed down by the courts about the ability, of course, not only of corporate interests, but, you know, the other side will also say unions as well, to kind of spend unlimited money. So how does that landscape look based on what you're proposing, and how that actually factors into what the federal level has said is permissible?
Well, there's two big kinds of spending, and what our new constitutional amendment of Measure 107, which was knocked out of the ballpark with 78% support across the state, allows us to set limits only on the candidates' contribution limits. What you're bringing up with Citizens United are called independent expenditures. They're outside the candidate, that you see different committees, you know, with these cute names, you know, Citizens for Cute Kitties could be a committee, a super PAC. And what Citizens United does, it doesn't allow us to limit those outside independent expenditures. But what we can do or limit the candidates' Phil Knight expenditures and other corporate donors. But at the same time, we can also what limited things we can do with that dark money, which is what independent expenditures are called, is we can require that they in that ad that comes out against someone, that they have to list their large donors. So if it's like the Shell Oil is the biggest donor behind that ad of that Cute Kitties committee, they would have to say that. And Marty can talk more about those recent proposals in Salem that tried to do that. That's the transparency part.
Yeah, there's been various attempts to, require a listing of the top 5 donors. I think is the most common one I've seen. There's the beef against campaign finance reform is it'll just go to independent expenditures. But one, we're allowed to have some transparency in that, so you can see where it's coming from. And 2, they don't get preferential rates the way that candidates do. Candidates, for their media, at least TV, are required to get the most advantageous rate. And so I don't believe independent expenditures do. And the rates are significantly better for that. So you have to spend more money. So it's not impossible to spend outside money, but you do have to spend more of it. And then if we had a requirement to do those, and it's funny because I already have, a requirement on my ads that says, paid for by Wilde for Oregon. So I mean, that's will more money go to independent expenditures? Yeah. Can you track it? Yeah. Are those ads as effective? Probably not. In my first campaign, they ran a negative ad and it was just blatantly false. And because of transparency, we were able to track it down, and it was various mills and natural resource extractors who had paid for it without doing their research. But it's, I'm not gonna say it's easy to fight back against that, but it is easier if you know who's behind it.
Yeah, and obviously the ability to hold someone to account sometimes can be very difficult. And as you mentioned, I think Marty as well as Patrick, the idea that so much money comes in at the end of elections, largely, not largely, but in part because they know that it's going to be difficult to sort of, hold someone to account, that it's all part of the fury that gets created. So, yeah, I mean, I guess I appreciate, Marty, you sort of defining that campaign finance can help, but clearly we have to be aware that there's still sort of this, the big beast in the room that is still allowing the capability to shape elections, even if it has some level of being a bit more transparent. Sorry, Patrick, I cut you off there.
No, it's okay. They had a good example in Northeast Bay of California in Richmond, where they did pass these transparency things. And then when the citizens of Richmond found out that the biggest donor was Exxon oil, those measures failed, So I think once we can uncover we can't limit those independent expenditures like we can candidates' expenditures, but we can expose them, and that's the dark money can be brought out into the sunlight. So
yep. I wanted to I mean, we can obviously circle back to this topic throughout. I was curious to see what both of your perspective was, and how having a dominant two-party political system as we have in this country, clearly you could have other parties. There's nothing stopping other parties from formulating and having status, but the truth is we're still a two-party dominant system. What have you seen? What have you observed, either in Oregon or nationally? How much is that hampering sort of real democratic actions on behalf of people in the environment? Or is there still merit for the two-party system? Just, again, curious to see what both of your perspectives are there.
Go ahead, Patrick.
Well, we have a great example. I ran as an independent in 2018 and was, like I said earlier, was hardly able to get any coverage with the debates and stuff. Betsy's running as an independent, and she's gotten coverage even before even before she was a candidate, she had these in-depth interviews. And the biggest difference was I had $10,000 and she had $10 million. So that just puts a spotlight on why with the media, it's so important that money is part of the game, not the party, not the person's ideas or their solutions, because we had a very thorough list of solutions on our webpage and stuff. And I was challenging my opponents to flush out the details of your plan and let's see what you're really talking about. And so the money, since the media gets the majority of that money, they're going to favor people that are raising that money because they want to get that ad money. So that's one example, 2018 and now 2022, where you had an independent in 2018 and then this new independent with the $10 million. So Marty?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're seeing I've been pretty clear. I think it's a three-part thing. And first is campaign finance reform. Second is open primaries. And third is nonpartisan redistricting. If we had those three, we'd have a much more democratic system. So now we're, past campaign finance reform on to some form of open primaries. I think we can see how that's working in Alaska right now with the election of Representative Peralta. And so they have, kind of an interesting system, and they have a top four primary, and then they have ranked choice voting in the general. And what they ended up with is a candidate who reflects the views of the majority of Alaskans. I think, I don't remember if she's a Democrat or an independent. I think she's caucusing with the Democrats, but she has her own beliefs, and she, those beliefs are shared by a lot of Alaskans. So, there's some stuff I may not agree with her on, but by God, she represents Alaskans pretty well. And so I'd like to see something like that. There kind of the challenge is there's a million different flavors. And I always say it's like there's folks that want to get rid of daylight savings time, right? But among that, there are people who want permanent daylight savings time and permanent standard time. And so the people who want to keep it the way it is always win, even though they're a minority, because there's a sort of splitting. And it's kind of the same thing. If you don't have ranked choice voting, is you end up with vote splitting and things like that. Whereas ranked choice voting, vote for who you want to, and then pick who's second best in your view, and you go there. The parties have always pushed back because they say, well, you can't pick our candidate. There's absolutely nothing requiring. One, we're paying the money. So, you want to have your own private election, go right ahead. You can pick your candidate and decide in the workings of your club who gets to be your candidate. But, you want public funds, for this election, then, we could set the rules about it. Who's allowed to call themselves what? That is a decision for the parties. But I have run with IPO endorsement as well as Democratic endorsement because they, I either got the write-ins or I think I got no, I didn't get the write-ins. Sorry, I didn't get it the first time, but the second time I had it. But that was their choice. They had their own process. So we have what's called fusion voting now. It's not really good enough. I think ranked choice voting would let people vote for who they want to vote for, and I think that would be an advantage for everyone. But I think what we have to do is stop the war between ranked choice voting and star voting. I think both sides have to commit to whatever gets out there, we're going to vote for it.
Yeah, I favor star voting because honestly, it's decentralized. And honestly, in Oregon and probably across the country, in Oregon, there's 36 elections because there's 36 counties. So with star voting, you don't need to bring all those 36 votes to one central location like you do with ranked choice voting. So that's one of the reasons I support star voting, but I don't want to get into that. But what Marty was talking about with that Alaskan indigenous woman that won, surprisingly, was because of the people's second choice. Because it was a very wicked Republican primary, and the challenger to Sarah Palin, those folks were so upset that their second choice was this, anybody but Palin kind of thing. So that's what put this woman over the top. So that's what's great about that kind of ranked choice voting or star voting is that, if the top two don't get it, you have to start looking at your second choice or your third choice. And a lot of folks, would surprise people with their second choice, or they would vote. What's great about those systems too is they would vote completely their heart. They're completely all their Christmas list of we want this, we want this, we want this. That candidate would be their first choice, and then their backup person could be that lesser of two evils kind of thing. So it just gives Americans and Oregonians a lot more freedom and a lot more choice with that different kind of system. And I think it's in the future, but I think we need campaign finance reform first, because otherwise you're gonna have a lot of big money fighting that. Just like we probably won't have single payer healthcare, which I've been a big advocate for, until we have campaign finance reform, because you're gonna have big pharma money and you're gonna have big medical monies opposing it. I mean, just like these committees in Salem are chosen by who raised the most money, not who has the most experience or seniority in Salem. It's who's the big money raiser becomes some of the chairs of these committees in Salem, since we have no limits whatsoever.
I want to bring a question to the both of you that I think, Marty, you touched on a little bit on that first question, which is, clearly election day is coming up. We're going to vote for our candidates. Our person may win, they may not win. And next thing you know, they're at the job, whether it's at the local level or at the state level, national level. So now they're doing supposedly the bidding of the people. There's the policies being considered, as you guys have spoke to a couple of potential policies around campaign finance. Patrick, you just mentioned healthcare. What does it really look like in your experience of being there or observing it, in the sense of the influence, the power of the large economic interests? So in shorthand terms, the corporate lobbyists that we hear about, Washington, D.C. has, I can't remember what the figure is now, over 5,000 lobbyists, doing the bidding of various interests. I don't know what the number is of registered lobbyists in Oregon, but clearly you have this element who has power beyond just voting day.
Sure.
So how does that get contended with? What does that really look like? How is that shaping or misshaping our world as we speak? Because of course we're sold every election cycle, if we again elect the right person, that change is going to happen. And then when we really analyze the policies that are being adopted, there are many, if not the majority, that are really tilted towards certain interests over really the true interest of people, communities, and the environment. So curious to see what else you guys have to add to the idea of the corporate lobbyist, post.
Well, I have kind of a great example of that. So you were talking about the chicken farms in Scio, right? With a lot of, mega farms, mega dairies, whatever, the challenge is often water. And so we were all, because I think it was Easter Day Farms, that was the challenge with getting one of the big dairies, mega dairies restarted, was, okay, the last guy who'd operated hadn't done the water right. And so were they going to get the water rights to do it? So we were all kind of wondering, 1 million chickens consumes a lot of water in a lot of ways. It turned out that they wanted to use something called the stock watering exception. Well, the stock watering exception was, you got a river going through your property, and you got, 10 or 20 head of cows, and can they drink from the stream? Well, so we have this rule that says, yeah, you can do that. So the small farmers were all about it because they didn't want to have to deal with lengthy water rights battles and stuff like that. It's sort of superficially, it makes sense for your typical small farmer. So, but when we heard that, we started thinking, well, okay, maybe we need to put some limits on the stock watering exception, because, clearly this wasn't what was intended. This was intended for your typical small farm. You're not using a lot of water, maybe less than an acre foot a year. It would be equivalent to a domestic water right. Well, so who comes pushing back but the Farm Bureau? And I'm like, we're they profess to represent small farms, and I'm like, hey, I'm not talking about eliminating the stock watering exception. The small farmers are going to be fine. Let's have a conversation, figure out a reasonable number, and go from there. Well, the funding for the Farm Bureau doesn't come from the small farmers. The funding for the Farm Bureau comes from the big guns, and so it comes out as, and I'm not trying to point at any particular lobbyist or anything, is what you have is then the Farm Bureau sort of hiding behind the big corporations, hiding behind the small farmers, and you have the small farmers coming to us and saying, why are you trying to put us out of business? And when we're clearly not, right? I mean, this is all just a sort of a mirage. I've seen it too with small businesses versus big businesses, especially when you're talking about tax policy, is big timber often hides behind small woodlot owners. And that's, I think, classic examples of how the big money will often try to hide behind the little stuff, but has a disproportionate influence in Salem.
My experience is in 2019, right after the last governor's race, we went to, and we had the support of Governor Brown to amend the Constitution. And what we did was we put it to the legislature to refer it to us voters, because the legislature can't amend the Constitution. Only the people can do that. So through the ballot process, which is very rare, by the way, to amend the Constitution. And it's failed in 2006 to amend the Constitution. But when I went door to door to the 90 members, 60 in the House and 30 in the Senate, what I heard commonly was the D's were worried about the corporate money, and the R's were worried about the union PAC monies. So, and that's why I came up with the idea of banning both, because if you balance that out, then you're going to keep people in the building to have that vote. And so that's what's challenging for the next governor and the next Speaker of the House and the next legislature in 2023 is to support our bill, which has got those simple limits, because there are big donors on both sides, like Marty was saying, that wouldn't like it. But it's time that those elected representatives just take the small donations from all of us. So then they're doing the people's business rather than, so it's a systemic change that would change the whole system in Salem. Who gets to be the chair of a committee? Who gets appointed to which committee? Who gets to speak to those committees? Which topics are talked about? Because some of this big money keeps us from talking about aerial spraying, or it keeps us from talking about these water issues. Because if you've got these big users and these big donors wagging the dog, there'll be certain issues you won't even have hearings on, like Marty was saying. And also I'm going to be pushing really strongly, back in 2019, what was different, first time in Oregon history, was the Senate president set up a campaign finance reform committee, which Jeff Golden, the senator from Ashland, who also ran with no corporate money and won. It was primary to beat an establishment primary challenge too. So they set up that committee, and we're going to push for the same kind of committee on the House side, because if we don't have our own committee and pass it through that committee with the bipartisan support, it goes to the Rules Committee. And for folks that don't know about Salem, the Rules Committee is the graveyard. There's no deadline. You may never hear your bill talked about. But having a specific committee, a CFR committee, we will have it, with both sides of the aisle on that committee. And I call it the Reform Caucus, and that's what we want to build, is a bipartisan, because that's the other problem. The efforts in the past haven't been bipartisan. And so when the R's threaten to walk out, the D's can say, well, we tried to pass campaign finance reform, but there was it's always the boogeyman, it's like, that's the,
yeah. I would say
their party for why you didn't get things done,
There's a good comment from Kelsey in the chat here about, putting more trust in mass mobilizations and in communities than, do that. It's sort of funny because, the trial lawyers mostly don't fight campaign finance reform because they know they can just get a list of 10 trial lawyers and say, email them and say, we've decided to support Joe. Please write Joe a check for the maximum amount. And that's fine. The numbers work out well for that. But with technology now too, if you're a union and you say, well, normally what they do is set aside a portion of your dues for political activity, and then the union bosses write the check. But you could also just set it up as essentially a bank, and you say, all right, everybody has their individual account, and at some point during the campaign season, we're going to shoot out an email, and you click yes or no. We recommend Joe. Click yes if you want to donate $5 from your account to Joe. There's different technology makes a lot of good things possible too. And it's not. It's not all on the left too. Chamber of Commerce could do the same thing. There's lots of different things you could do. So I think there's but some people might say no, and I've been supported by firefighters before, but I've also had conversations with the chiefs of the firefighter, the bosses in the firefighters union. Most of their members probably didn't vote for me, And so there's a bit of a reluctance to actually sort of embrace full democracy in some organizations. And I'm not blaming the firefighters, please don't get me wrong. They were just saying that, the rank and file were more conservative than the central folks. But if you want to opt out, fine, opt out. I think there's ways to do that mass thing. And yeah, of course, 80% of people are going to say yes, but if it was firefighters doing it, if 20% didn't like me, that's fine. Hit the no button. There's just different ways we can do this and keep the voters empowered in a positive way. And that the collateral benefit to that too is it keeps them informed.
And through history, we've seen this progress. It started with Jerry Brown when he ran against Bill Clinton the very first time. Jerry Brown set a $100 limit. He never accepted during that whole campaign over $100 per person. And he ran all the way through to the end against Bill Clinton. And then we saw Howard Dean from Vermont, the governor of Vermont, be real successful, and then MoveOn.org was born. And then, of course, the guru of Bernie Sanders of raising, with the $27 donation. So these are models that we see. So we know we can do that, because like Marty said, it does take money. So we're not trying to cap how much you can raise, which you can't do constitutionally. But we do want it to shift from the big donors, regardless if they're PAC monies or corporate monies, to just mom and pop donors, just regular donors. Because even $1,000 limit, which is a lot of states have $1,000 limit, including Kentucky, which is what I propose. But that's for a regular working person, that's $80 a month. That's our water bill here in Brownsville. So if you were going to do $1,000 donation for a year, you'd really have to budget that, So, but there are friends and family members that have six-figure incomes, like my little sister. So the $1,000 check was easy for her, but majority of our donations were under 100, and we ran all the way in the general of 2018, and we ran all the way in 2022 on the primary. So I think it can be done. It's just like I've heard Marty say before, some of the old timers in Salem aren't used to of getting the small donations. They're used to getting a $20,000 check from X, Y, or Z. So.
Well, I'm curious. You've been laying out, Patrick, and as well you, Marty, reinforcing the idea of what could be different and improved to make it more equitable. Let's say potentially more democratic. Doesn't guarantee that it will be. And you just mentioned, Patrick, something around, well, you couldn't do this because it's unconstitutional. Well, clearly constitutions are written by people. They can be rewritten by people. So it makes me wonder, what would the ideal be when it comes not only to electing people that represent you, but to make sure that they're actually doing the job that they were elected to do? So like what other elements, if you could, wave the magic wand, so to speak, what else should we really be talking about versus just working around the constrictions to make it better within, let's say, a faulty system? So if there's things that are deeper than that, what are those deeper elements, so that at least if their likelihood of changing tomorrow aren't there, people are thinking about that, well, we could actually have it be more robust. It could be this much better. What are some of those things in your guys' mind beyond the things that you've been mentioning, which sound like they add improvements, but maybe not ultimately solve a better sort of representative form of government, something that is truly more democratic?
Well, we see the example is like Jamie Skinner is going to codify Roe v. Wade. So rather than having it be this constitutional battle, just like we did in Oregon with Tina Kotek, codified reproductive rights for women, we can do that. So the reason I bring that up as an example, we can do that with campaign finance reform. We can move to amend the Constitution to allow us to limit the dark money. We were talking about the Citizens United is the biggest example. So these are things that our Congress and our Senate can codify. But like Marty said before, it's tricky when the folks that are going to do that work for us are dependent on this system. So that's what's tricky. And if we don't work on the campaign finance, if we're unsuccessful in the 2023 session, I know Honest Elections and others are really working hard to get the ballot signatures for a ballot measure, because that's the great thing about Oregon. That'd be, you're talking about your pipe dream. It'd be great if we had a national ballot measure system, so we could fix some of these things nationally, But.
One of the things I like in the campaign finance realm is publicly financed elections. And, the way that usually works is you have a certain qualifying number of small donations, donations under $50 a year, $100, whatever. And you agree to a total cap of X dollars on, a cap on a limit on the size of donations. And then all of your donations are matched, often by a factor of many times. People, talk about how expensive that would be. I would expect that the reverse is actually true. Like, I think I did a back of the envelope calculation that you could do this with, under $100 million every other year. Well, that sounds like a lot of money, and it is. But in the context of a budget that's, 27 to $30 billion, it's really not. And when you consider the disproportionate impact these corporate donations and, and large PAC donations have, it's another way of getting at it. I'm with Patrick. I think, having an absolute cap is sort of the first step, but there's lots of things you can do after that. In terms of ongoing accountability, I mean, we certainly have an active recall system here. It's a little weird in the legislative context because the legislative sessions are pretty short. So, I mean, if you get recalled after your first 6 months of service, well, you've probably taken all the significant votes you're ever going to take in that 2-year term. I like the small donations because it really does make you accountable to the people. You got to have a lot of conversation. No, I don't like calling people and asking for money, but I don't, dial Joe and say, "Hey, Joe, give me $50." I call Joe and say, "Hey, Joe, how you doing? Are you happy with what I've been doing? Is there anything on your mind?" And we have a short conversation if he wants to. And then I say, "Well, I'd like to keep going. Can you send me $50?" And Joe says, "Yes, hopefully." But I see a lot of, but it's work, but it's the kind of work we hope our politicians are doing, right? We want them talking to voters. The best, actually, I would say the best canvassing time I ever had was after my first session in 2019, before COVID hit. I just decided I wanted to keep knocking doors, and I wasn't going to say vote for me. I just wanted to knock on people's doors and say, "What's on your mind? What were you happy with? What you're not happy with?" I had some great conversations, and I had a legislative side mailer, so it wasn't campaign material, but just said, here's what we did. Because, a lot of people just say, I don't want to talk, but oh, here you go, here's what we did. But, one, it really helped in 2020 because I couldn't knock on doors. But two, it felt like the kind of work I should be doing as a representative, because that's the title, representative. I'm supposed to represent these people.
I wanted to piggyback on what Marty was saying about publicly financed elections. Oregon sort of has that. We're pretty rare that we give up to $50 per person, not a tax credit, but a total rebate. And in the Salem budget, that equals like $2 million a year. And so I know that $50 donation limit should be raised. So in this new campaign finance action that we're going to do in 2023, what if we raise that to the same as the limit? So the $1,000 limit is what you would get in your rebate. So then in a way it would be publicly financed elections. And I had, in 2019, going door to door in Salem, I had a great conversation with John Lively, who's the rep from Springfield, and he's real involved in the marijuana money issues. And I said, John, what if we had the marijuana money pay for the elections? So it would be green elections, and he really liked that idea.
I wanted to poll on something you said earlier, Patrick, about if you're not successful through the legislature on campaign finance, shifting to direct democracy, direct legislative power of the people. Clearly, historically, that all came out of the big business and government not listening to the small people, so they pushed reforms like the referendum process initiative and recall. But over the years, Oregon included, as people try to use that outlet, it's become more difficult, either through legislation or through judicial decisions, to make it harder, even if it's constitutionally protected as it is in Oregon. In addition, the cost factor has gotten, in some cases, cost prohibitive, especially if you start doing things on the state level. So it's starting to be, and in a lot of cases it very much is, not really a means for the people to utilize to sort of check power or to push change that they want to see. So I'm curious, Patrick, as well as Marty, like what is the future for the initiative process, either locally or statewide, in Oregon or elsewhere, if it was meant to be sort of that check, and now it's become more difficult, blocked, or even in some cases cost prohibitive to engage in because of things like campaign financing, for instance.
Yeah, well, and COVID really made it difficult too. So my short answer, I'll let Marty get into deeper, is that I think that the Secretary of State should reevaluate that whole system. That's one of their things that the Secretary of State does, is these audits. And so I think exploring that, how to make it more 21st century friendly, and how to make the bars, like, just even a good example is this recent, we were hoping that a campaign finance bill would be on the ballot this November, parallel to this crazy governor's race with all this big money. And Shamia Fagan dusted off some old rules and made it super hard for that Honest Elections group to get those ballot measures forward. So yeah, I think if the next Secretary of State doesn't reevaluate that whole system and update it and make it better for us and more direct democracy, we need to have that, because there are a lot of, besides campaign finance reform, there are a lot of things we can do with that system.
Yeah, I'd agree. If I was going to take the next step in an initiative petition process, I would probably have a bill that allowed online signatures. Sign up for an account, prove who you are to the Secretary of State, and then you can go and sign things that way. Obviously you could still do it in person as well, but I think we have gone too far to restrict the ability to do initiative petitions. And at least one vote I regret on that. There was some allegations of fraud and probably took it too far. But I think, in a perfect world, that's what I'd like to see. I think until you get campaign finance reform, you're probably not going to see it because the moneyed interests generally oppose that. They don't like the initiative petition process because it limits their ability to shape the product. So,
and I think in the community rights realm, we've also experienced that, those who have access to make decisions today are also oppositional because the line is, well, if we make it easier, then the bad laws will somehow be put in front of the voters, so therefore we're going to make the process more difficult. So we found it's like across the board there isn't really a whole lot of interest, especially for those in Salem, to see something like that occur.
Well, we all got a boss, and mine's the voters, and so anything that limits my ability to hear what they want to say is troubling to me. And I view the initiative petition process as a way of them expressing to me the limits on me. So I don't love every initiative petition that's passed. There's some really bad ones out there, but when people say, why don't you overturn such and such? I said, because the voters passed it, and until the voters change their mind on it, especially for constitutional stuff, we're limited by that. And I'm happy to ask them, but until they change their mind on it, that's who I work for. Especially some of the tax stuff, I'd say,
and
it's led us to a bad place.
Of course, the response can also be there's a lot of bad legislation passed by those that represent. And
not everything's perfect.
Yeah, and of course it's a disproportionate amount that's adopted by legislative bodies compared to the initiative. It doesn't even come close to this if you calculate the sheer volume.
And I think we got 4 on the, I think California has 25 or something, so that might be a few mini, but I think if you made it easier to sign and then maybe tinkered a little with the number of signatures, you could get to a good place. But that's kind of the direction I'd go. I'd
like to add that the threat of a ballot measure can motivate the legislature or the governor too. So, and making the system, having that audit and having the review by the Secretary of State would streamline that system and make that threat more real. Because right now they can brush it off. Oh yeah, we're going to shut down that ballot measure, so there's no threat there. I mean, we see that with campaign finance reform just recently. So yeah, I think having a better referendum system, more streamlined 21st century, like Marty was saying, with electronic ways to gather, can continue that good threat and motivation, we should call it, not a threat. Motivation to do the right thing in Salem. And I think we will see that if we have those regular limits where regular people are your donors rather than special interest groups. Like Marty said, that's who you work for, or those, because I always say, who are these governor candidates working for? And you look at the list that we showed earlier, and it, for Betsy Johnson, it's the Big Timber and Phil Knight and all these billionaires in Oregon, not regular people.
Yeah, and the truth is, the direct legislative powers, it's meant to be the form of the people to the people, and unfortunately, the legal system has come much more into view in the sense of stopping the political process, so that there's almost been an overreach by the courts in a lot of cases, not just in Oregon, but in other parts of the country when it's come to the initiative process. And it's another one of those things, I think, to your point, Patrick, of, getting the people who are supposedly overseeing these kind of things to really evaluate, have we gone too far with a lot of these reviews? Or, should we allow, of course, political questions, which is what ballot measures are about. These are political questions. And until they're adopted, then they're law. Until that point, they're really more of a political question than a legal one. But we've allowed the capability of, in large cases, economic interests to sort of force the issue before the people even have a chance to sort of debate or consider the proposals themselves. And I think that is undermining the possibility, also to your point, Patrick, of maybe motivating those in office to really do something which was another intention of the initiative process from its inception.
Like the old saying, they hurry and get out in front of the people, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I say, you can lead the voters, you can follow the voters, but you can't get too far from the voters. So, or you don't stay in office, nor should you. I just wanted to be clear, and I put it in the chat that if we did make changes to the initiative petition process, I think those need to go to the voters, even if they're statutory. It's their process, and they should have a say on it. But a referendum from the legislature would be appropriate.
Well,
yeah, that's what could happen more often if we had campaign finance reform in the legislature, is they could refer it to the voters more often, because they would hear from their constituents, which are now their small donors, to refer that. And so we could skip, like we did with Measure 107, and we could skip the whole signature gathering system and get it right on the ballot. And to give you a little more background on how successful that constitutional amendment was, it wasn't just 78% across the state, which was out of the ballpark, but the lowest support was Lake County with 60%. So, I mean, so it's a very popular. Campaign finance reform is a bipartisan issue. Everyone's tired of the big money. Everyone's tired of those negative ads, and they just want the politicians to talk to them directly, like Marty was saying, continuing to have constituency contact, and have them be the small donors,
We are just past the hour. We're going to go till 7:30. There's been questions that have come up in chat. I think we've sort of touched on a few of those already. I'd like, if Marty and Patrick, if you guys are willing at this point, to kind of turn it over to those in attendance to see what sort of comments or questions you have. So if you want to, raise your hand or put the little emoji thing in the corner there, I can pick you. And if you've got a question or concise comment that you want to make, we'll try to get through as many as we can before that half hour rolls around. So
it's my favorite part, Q&A.
So besides what has sort of come up in chat, that I think there's been addressing of a decent amount of that. What else do people have on their minds that they're wanting to kind of bring in the mix or ask of Marty and Patrick here?
And your vote does matter. I know that's the theme while you're waiting for your questions to come forward. I ran for Roseburg City Council and lost by 17 votes. And what I learned was I walked early. I got out early and put up signs, but I should have walked that second time because my opponent went after me and talked, negatively. And if I'd gone back that second walk, because we even had a recount. It was 2002 when I lived in Roseburg, just lost by 17 votes. So your vote does matter, which is the answer to this theme. Every vote is crucial.
Brett, please share. You're on mute.
Thank you. Thank you for the recognition. I wanted to touch on what Marty was mentioning about the IP process and how you enjoyed, Marty, getting out and meeting your constituents. I've had the same experience in doing a signature petition for my voter pamphlet statement. That, I think, was the most fascinating part of my entire campaign, because I had supporters that wanted to get supporters that wanted to get supporters, and the outreach just happens exponentially. And I got to meet a lot of really interesting people, meet a lot of really intelligent people. Who would know we have people like this out in rural Oregon that have got really good ideas, but there's no place for them to be heard. So back to the representation idea. And I'm wondering if there's some way with, I don't know that campaign finance reform is necessarily the way to do it, but for us to look at some process that would require us to actually get out. It's part of my beef in my own campaign against my opponent. I've never met the guy. I live on the same street that he does. I've lived here 5 years. He's never held a town hall. I mean, this is Port Orford, little teeny town. I think Patrick has been here at least once or twice. And I've never met the guy. And he's lived here his entire life. His parents live here still. So this idea of representation, I think, needs to happen on the ground, where we get out and meet people, even in a small little town, so they at least know who we are. They've heard us speak or seen our face. And those signatures, in this case, told the Secretary of State that I've got enough support behind me on the ground that I could make a difference in a candidacy. And I'm wondering if there's some way we could use that type of idea in campaign finance reform just to help support that or move it into a whole different realm.
I've seen, I'll just have a couple short ones because I know Patrick's probably smarter on this than I am. I've seen a couple things. One is sort of a voucher system where every voter gets a voucher, and you go door to door, and if what they like what you have to say, they give you the voucher, and it's $5 or $10 in a publicly financed system, but it's a way of demonstrating the viability of your candidacy, that you're actually going out and talking to folks. What was the other way I was thinking of? You could just do away with filing by money and just say you have to get a certain number of signatures. That's another way.
Our city council does that here in Port Orford. They had to get 25 signatures to get on.
Yeah, I mean,
on the ballot.
It's fun for me. That's the one I've seen in the campaign finance realm. I think there are other ways to encourage that. Sometimes it's hard to get people's attention. One of the reasons I like going door to door is not because everybody wants to chat with me, if I'm, but because some do. And I always put my contact information on my literature, and I say, hey, not a good time. That's fine. My number's right on there. Give me a call. And by the time I'm done with knocking on 150 doors, I usually have 2 or 3 calls or texts, saying, oh, hey, yeah, I really like this or that, or I want to talk to you about whatever. And so I really enjoy that, but it's work. I mean, I think,
I enjoyed it too, Brett. And the governor's signatures, you had to gather even more, but it was great. I had an old ironing board, an old metal ironing board, and I just pop it up in front of the Eugene Library and gather signatures, or at some festival or event that would allow it. I got kicked out of the Benton County Fair when I was gathering signatures, which was interesting because I was right outside it was when I was running as an independent, and I was right outside the Democratic and Republican booths, just out in the aisleway gathering signatures. So they didn't like that. But yeah, I totally agree. Having a system where it's required, because that's another thing that we could talk about briefly, is this whole how we do the debates. Because now I'm talking again statewide. I would love to see debates, and we have over 30 community colleges across the state, and I would have loved to seen that required, that we had to show up in Eastern Oregon or the South Coast and have a debate with all the candidates, and the criteria to get into the debates, because that's all it used to just be. You had to raise over $1 million and you're in the debate. But I tried to change that criteria where you had to have a PAC, you're gathering small donations. You had to have not ads, but articles across the state. You had to have a web page. Some of the candidates didn't have a web page. So I mean, some of these basic things, and your idea of the signatures could be part of it too. That you had to have some engagement, and not just all in Portland if you're running for a statewide office, but across those 36 counties, because it's all. My dream is that we end the divisiveness and we have one Oregon again. So
I would just add one more thing. If you have a publicly financed system, you can incentivize a lot of things that you can't actually require. I mean, so the right to free speech means you actually have the right not to say anything. And so right now you can't require someone to tell you how they feel on things. In fact, in my first campaign, I answered the surveys from Project Vote Smart because they just wanted to hear, and they yelled at me for that. It was, no, you'll just alienate people. But, if you made it a condition of receiving public financing that you participate in a debate or give answers to certain questions or something like that, that's the way to get to a thing you couldn't otherwise require. I think there's a lot of good that can come from that. I'm so disappointed. There is a competitive race here in Lane County that I won't go into, but one of the candidates has just refused to do any forums at all. I mean, debate's kind of a loaded term, but a candidate forum is just a place where they come and answer, questions. And that candidate just decided it wasn't in their interests, and they're probably going to win. But if you could change that, then, you know, I feel like the voters should know who you are and get their questions answered.
I had the same thing. It felt really strategic that my opponent wouldn't agree to make forum appearances in Port Orford, because he knows he lives here and he doesn't quite have the constituency in his own town, so let's not appear there. And it put me in a position that it took away my voice.
Mhm.
So if we can find some other way to still give those opponents a voice, or to give those candidates a voice even when their opponent doesn't want to participate, I think is something to look at too.
Marty's brought up public finance. I want to share with your listeners a couple of examples. The state of New York is one of the first states to have this public financing match, the small donor match. And then the city of Seattle has an example too. So if folks want to explore that, I think one is like 4-to-1 match, and I think the state of New York is like 8-to-1. So there are good examples that we could adopt. Our system of giving the rebate is a way to do that without having it. You know, you just raise that money up to above $50 per person. Are there other questions, Kai?
Yeah, no, it was my next question. If there were more questions or other comments that people wanted to bring into the discussion, we've got about 12 minutes or so before our time is up.
Or if there's certain community rights issues you're working on, I would love to discuss that too, you know.
Looks like Richard's got his hand up.
Yeah, been pretty impressed by the progress of people trying to establish star voting here in Oregon. And as I understand it, star voting, if put in place, would actually eliminate the need for a primary altogether, thus eliminating or cutting in half basically the campaign finance season. What are your reactions to both that concept of not having a primary and having the star voting in place, and the effect on campaign finances, if any? Thank you.
Well, I can tell you what I hear from like the minor parties that don't like primaries, or they don't like primaries that eliminate them with the top two choices, so that the minor parties don't like it. Parties don't like things like that because they're not guaranteed a slot in the November election, because, you know, these minor parties can have their own conventions and pick their own people. So there's that. I'm obviously the big parties want only their people to vote in their primary, and like Marty said, we all pay for those primaries, so it's a taxation without representation. But and I fought many times with the DPO, the Democratic Party of Oregon, to open their primary to all, because the big thing that's different in the 50s, 90% of people were with the two parties, but now 35% of the voters in Oregon are with none of the above. So, you know, we have to have a different system for sure, and star voting is one of the examples that I would support.
Yeah, I've supported star voting in the past. I would also say that the you know, in terms of mitigating the damage, the thing that irritates me the most is the rule that in a nonpartisan election, if one candidate gets more than 50% in the primary, then they're the only one on the ballot in the general. And the problem with that is the electorate that goes to the primaries is much smaller. So I'm not a fan of the primaries because it's not really a representative sample. And I mean, you could argue we've made it so easy that they should participate, but, you know, and I'd hear you, but I think certain decisions should be made by a broader electorate. Our primaries are super early too. I mean, it seems weird in the context of the presidential one, but I mean, I see states in the Midwest where they have, you know, August or September, you know, candidate primaries, and they have a different primary for the one. And it's just, I don't know. I like the Alaska version, you know, top 4 and then ranked choice or star, whatever you want. But I think to give credit, you know, if there's 20 candidates, it does get kind of difficult. So, you know, I wouldn't be opposed to some sort of basic sifting process in a primary, but you know, the one that bothers me the most right now is that nonpartisan one, because you might be winning with, you know, 26% of the electorate or something, as opposed to, you know, what you'd hope for, which is, you know, 70% turnout. You're at least getting, you know, 35 plus 1%, you know, something like that.
And back to your Christmas wish list, Kai, I've always wanted to have none of the above as one of my choices on my ballot. So that if that got the majority in the election, then it's a do-over, you know, because the whole choice of two evils, people are really tired of that. And that's why I think we see a lot of the decline of voter turnout or participation, along with the big money, you know, because even when I ran in 2018, my $50 donors stopped. When Phil Knight started donating millions of dollars to the other candidates, my small donors said, Patrick, $50 is not going to, you know, so that's discouraging too. So, because that's the biggest thing we want high voter turnout all the time. And so giving folks more choices with these alternative methods of ranked choice or star voting or open primaries, because Marty's point is completely correct. I mean, the turnout in the primaries, when you look at them, are dismal compared to what happens. And as a NAV, a non-affiliated voter for 20 years, most of my primary ballots were unopposed judges. And it was like, what am I voting for? You know, there really wasn't any, because I couldn't vote for Bernie and I couldn't vote for Howard Dean or all these things.
But I think there's a question in there that I'll throw in, which is just overall voter confidence. I mean, if money is really frustrating the vast majority, especially corporate money, but also the fact that, you know, people don't have time. There isn't really time for sort of deeper civic engagement. So I guess sort of back to the Christmas wish list idea, you know, we could take care of the money potentially on a deep level, but what about the time component from each of your perspective? I mean, if people actually had more time to be civically, politically engaged, would that make a difference?
I think that point about having a required engagement, like be it signatures or required candidate forums, be part of our system. I think that, and not have them like at 10 o'clock in the morning when everyone's at work, you know, like a lot of our county commissioner meetings are right in the middle of the day where people can't do it. But, you know, the advantage with the digital system of the 21st century is you can have ways to reach out. Even your show here is going to be recorded so folks can catch up if they had to work tonight, and they can catch up and learn about it. But yeah, it's overwhelming with all the information. What's to Oregon's credit, I mean, we're one of the oldest having a vote by mail. And the greatest thing I tell folks from out of state is that voters pamphlet. And I think we could do more with the voters pamphlet, you know, because if we're going to lower that amount of money that's going to all those flyers and ads, we could do more with the voters pamphlet and have more stuff. I mean, to run for governor with 325 words, wow, that was quite the restriction, you know.
Yeah, I think somebody posted in the chat about ranked choice voting. I don't know about star voting. Encouraging more positive campaigning. It's not just the amount of time that people have, it's their willingness to engage. And I think to a lot of people, the whole process just feels dirty. And that's because of the mudslinging, you know? And so if there's things we can do to disincentivize that, what I think you'll find is people more willing to engage. It's not, how do I choose between these two awful people? It becomes, hey, they've set forth different visions of the positive visions of the future. Which one sounds better to me, you know? And I think that's, you know, closer to how most people define leadership, you know, setting forth a positive vision of the future that inspires people to bring it to pass. And just, you know, I'm discouraged. I hear, you know, a lot of other people discouraged, and because of that, they're limiting their engagement. And that's the purpose of negative campaigning. It's not to change your mind; it's to convince you not to vote. So I'd love to see a system that had different incentives. Yeah.
Back to that is what I was saying about having expanded voters pamphlet, because, you know, what I was saying, you have 325 words, we had to pick our top 3 issues that we were going to highlight. But each of those only had a paragraph. So you can't really get into your solutions, because one of the reasons I'm into this is all about solutions. So I want to hear what their solutions are to our challenges, so if we had a way, rather than they did this and they're bad, and like Marty was saying, we don't want to hear that. We want to hear what their ideas are, what their vision, so we need a way to do that that's really clear. And one of the great things I love is the League of Women Voters. They do these thorough interviews, and if there are ways to have those kinds of interviews really accessible, that'd be great too. And like I said, more candidate forums way out in the rural areas where some of these candidates don't ever go. And like Brett said, his neighbor, he's never even met him. That's embarrassing and terrible.
Brett, you had your hand up.
And if I can back you up, Patrick, League of Women Voters is where I've been doing my forums out here in the rural district. I also wanted to toss in on your 325 words, hours. That includes our background, our occupational history, all those things. It's like I wrote mine and I thought the 325 were just on what my thoughts were about it as being a candidate. Oh no. I had to cut that all down because I needed to introduce myself and give some background. I'd never run before. And by the time I did that, I had nothing left, no space left to put in anything about what my campaign would support or what my platform was.
So none of you are supporting that all political activity should be on Twitter, is what I'm guessing.
So nasty, yeah. I mean, I would say that's another way for those of us who are a little skeptical about putting public money in candidates' hands. You could do it a different way. You could say, you could have another voters pamphlet or an early voters pamphlet and say, if you're willing to weigh in on these topics, we'll give you more space in an earlier pamphlet. It's essentially a free mailer. And so if you're willing to do that as a public entity, you could create more bandwidth and more engagement on that without, paying money to candidates, which some people don't like. I understand.
That's a good example of how you could filter out. We had like 17 Democratic candidates for governor, and a bunch of them didn't even have a voters pamphlet thing. They didn't gather the signatures, or they didn't pay the $3,000, whichever. They just really didn't plan to campaign for real. And so having those options and requirements for that criteria, like I said, that you should have a mechanism for raising money. You should have a web page. You should have a voters pamphlet piece, so that it just shows that you're for real, that you're a real candidate. And sometimes people like to keep it on the down low and sneak in. I mean, we have a Lynn County commissioner. He doesn't even have his photo, and he's the incumbent. It's just like, they're just like, wow, let's get real. Let's be there, because 70% of life is showing up,
Well, we are about at time here. Any last thoughts either from you, Marty, or you, Patrick, before we sign off?
Just thank you for having me, and it's been great to talk about these issues. And honestly, this is some of the reasons I'm not continuing in partisan politics, is just a frustration with the unwillingness to change the rules to make the process more democratic.
Thank you.
Yeah, me too. Thanking community rights across the state and the state organization for hosting this, because these discussions and conversations are crucial. And thanks for all those that took time out of their night to come and keep up the good work. We're all in this together, so we just have to. The work is far from over, and I hope we can engage you in 2023, the legislative session, to actually pass some campaign finance reform.
Wonderful. Well, on behalf of the Oregon Community Rights Network, thank you, Marty, and thank you, Patrick, for tonight. I think it's been a great conversation, and we will get this recording out and online here very shortly. So for those that want to engage with others that couldn't make it, they'll have this to refer to. So thanks everyone for being here tonight. Much appreciated. Have a great evening.